This is the 2020 Jo Jorgensen for President event. I'd quickly like to say I'm glad that we have a couple of our other local candidates here running for state rep in the 171st district. We've got Hobson McCown running for Congress in the 12th district. We've got Liz Terwilliger here. But the reason we're all here this evening is to hear from the next president of the United States. She is something special. A psychologist who lectures at Clemson University, a businesswoman who has owned and operated her own software marketing firm. She was the vice presidential candidate of the Libertarian Party in 1996. She's a fantastic voice for liberty. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to you the next president of the United States, Dr. Jo Jorgensen.
So glad to be here in Pennsylvania. So we're here today, first of all, to talk to all the wonderful voters and to spread our message, but also because ballot access is very important. And we're here to give a little boost to the state of Pennsylvania. And for all of those who have been collecting signatures, I just want you to know that I've been there. Luckily, I'm from a state that has pretty good ballot access. We turned in many signatures years ago and haven't had much problem since then. So I've helped out a little bit in the past as a volunteer with Virginia and Illinois collecting a few signatures. So I know it can be a thankless job and I really appreciate it. However, we do need to be on the ballot. I would like to be on the ballot in all 50 states so that every American can have a real choice. Every American can have an alternative to what we're seeing now. And that's what I'm hearing from people on the campaign trail. So I'd like to talk a little bit about healthcare. The one message I would like to get to every American is that we do not have a free market system. We hear politicians say, well, you know what? The free market's not working, so we have to go to Medicare for all. Well, first of all, we have not had a free market system in almost 100 years. And secondly, whenever I hear Medicare for all, what I think is VA hospital for all. It's a monopoly that has not worked well. It won't work for anyone, and it's particularly egregious that it's not working for those who have been willing to risk their lives for our country. What we have right now is a horrible system that really isn't an insurance-based system at all. A lot of people say, well, health insurance costs are out of control. Yeah, they're out of control because it's not really insurance. If you look at car insurance, it does not pay, for instance, for your gas, oil, and car washes. And just think about if it did. If your car insurance paid for your gasoline, would you have any incentive to drive around town finding the cheapest price on gasoline? Probably not. You take your little copay card, go to the closest gas station, or perhaps the nicest one that gives you coffee and donuts while you get filled up, and then pay your little $5 copay and be off on your way. Also, what about the gasoline stations themselves? They have absolutely no incentive to try to bring down prices because they know they're going to get paid by the big insurance companies anyway. And that's exactly what's happening with our health insurance, that we've got nobody in charge of keeping down prices. Now, a few people have said, well, but of course the insurance companies want to keep down prices because they don't want to pay claims. Actually, they've got to keep prices down or keep claims down a little because, of course, they'd go bankrupt if they accepted every claim. But the only way for them to grow, the only way for them to make a bigger profit this year than last year is to pay out more claims so that the following year they can charge higher premiums. And then the following year, of course, they want to pay out more claims so they can charge higher premiums the following year. So there is absolutely no one patient, doctor, insurance company that is trying to keep down healthcare costs because nobody has a reason to. Nobody. And if you look at the only two somewhat free market systems that we have in our country, which would be LASIK surgery and cosmetic surgery, what you've seen is you've seen prices go down dramatically and you've seen quality go up because the person, the patient himself or herself is paying for care. And there's an old saying that nobody ever washes the rental car before turning it back in. And nobody ever spends anybody else's money as well as they spend their own. And that's what's happening. But with LASIK surgery, people have to pay for it themselves, and so they do shop around. And consequently, doctors compete with each other through advertising and keeping their prices down. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm blaming the doctors because they're in this too. They're pretty much handcuffed to all the paperwork and they don't like the system any better than we do. But unfortunately, the rest of the country sees the problem and says, well, the problem is a free market, we need more government. And I say that having big government failure right now isn't going to be fixed by having an even bigger government failure. The other thing I'd like to talk about is bringing the troops home and turning America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. Not only is it not right to taxpayers to be the world's policemen and take tax dollars from Missouri, Nevada, and Pennsylvania and send them to wealthy Germany and France to pay for their military, it's not doing a good job. And you hear the stories about how, oh, it's great in France. They get 5 weeks of vacation. Well, we don't get 5 weeks of vacation. We get more like 2. So why should we be spending money over there to help them with their military? And, you know, it wouldn't be so bad if it were helping things. But it's making things worse. And all we have to do is look at 9/11. Now, let me give you a big disclaimer that nothing, absolutely nothing justifies the people from Saudi Arabia mostly who flew the planes into the buildings on September 11th. However, bin Laden was able to recruit them because we were over there. He twisted our actions around and said, look at the Americans. They said they were going to be here temporarily. They're not. They said they'd be gone by whatever date. They're still here. They're here because they're trying to take over our religion. They're trying to take over our government. So being over there made it much easier for him to recruit people. Now, if we're not over there, does that mean everything's fine? No. There will still be crazy people in the world. There still may be people flying planes into buildings. But let's not make it easy for them to do that. Let's not make it easy for somebody to twist what we're doing into something that serves their purpose. So we need to bring the troops home. And the next question, thank you. The next question is, can we save money? What about taxes? You know, how big of a government, what would your government look like? Well, I'd like to point out that we spend our military budget each year totals more than about the next 7 countries combined. So we could have huge military cuts in the magnitude of 2/3 of $1 trillion and still be tied for the largest military budget on this planet. And we're in close to 150 different countries. If we bring the troops home, they will be with their families, and they can do what they were meant to do, which is to protect American soil, not other countries, and not making things worse. And the environment. A lot of libertarians have shied away from the environment, partially because since it's not as economic, many libertarians haven't been as interested in it because the Libertarian Party has started more on the personal and economic freedoms. However, that's a top issue today. Young people are very interested in the environment. And we need to talk about it because, once again, the Libertarian Party has the best solution, the only solution. And I love to point out that if we wherever you see big government, you see big pollution. Wherever you see smaller government, you see less pollution. And we need to unleash the technology. And right now, we've got the federal government that is subsidizing old fossil fuel technology to something like $15 billion a year. What we need to do is stop subsidizing companies, stop picking winners and losers, and allow the free market to decide which way to go. And a lot of people have said, well, it sounds like what you want is to have nuclear energy. I believe that's the best option, but the president should not be deciding what type of energy we use. The government needs to just stay out of it and let the free market do its job, and let's see what the people want for their energy. And the good news is that nuclear energy, because it's been advanced by the free market, by companies, we're seeing much safer, a newer generation of nuclear energy. And even Rolls-Royce, the luxury car maker, they've developed nuclear reactors that are about a tenth the size of the old ones, and again, much safer. So again, I'd like to thank you for coming out, and thank you for your ballot access. For those of you who are members of the party, I'd like to point out, if you haven't heard yet, that something like 75% of our volunteers are from outside the party. We keep hearing over and over that we can't just keep using the old system. It's broken, and we need to have a new voice. So the way to have a new voice is, as I mentioned, getting me on the ballot in all 50 states, and last, trying to get me onto the debates. Because without anybody else on the debate, we're going to hear a fake, phony fight between two people who are both in favor of big government, and neither one is working for peace around the world. The Democratic Party muzzled Tulsi Gabbard with her pro-peace, anti-war message, and there's no reason to think that Joe Biden is going to act any differently. So for Americans who want a peaceful world, who want to make their own decisions, I am the only choice. If a pollster calls you and asks you who you're voting for, even if you haven't completely made your mind up, if you're considering voting for me, please say you're voting for me so we can get to 15%, so we can be in the debate. If you don't like my performance in the debate, then you don't have to vote for me, but at least there's a third voice, or second voice, I should say. So thank you very much. So are there any questions? I can take like 3 or 4 questions. Yes.
Take the mic.
Hello. Everybody I know agrees that the lives of black people matter just as much as any other race. The Black Lives Matter movement suggests that this country does not value the lives of black peoples as much as other people, and that this country suffers from systemic racism. You tweeted out support of the Black Lives Matter movement, seemingly suggesting that this country does not value the lives of black people. You clarified your tweet to suggest that you meant that we need to end qualified immunity and police brutality, but there's little evidence, if any, to suggest that police brutality or qualified immunity disparately affect people of color. Do you feel that black people are systemically oppressed, and if so, what evidence have you seen of this?
I would agree with you that Americans realize that Black Lives Matter, but I would suggest that the U.S. government doesn't realize it. And unfortunately, we've had systemic racism since the slaves were freed. So when the slaves were freed, they went out and, just like new business people, they offered their services, which were excellent services, by the way. They were great craftsmen because they were the ones doing all the work. So they were offering their services, excellent services, at a lower price, because that's what you do when you start a business. That's what I did when I started my business. I offered it at lower I offered my services at lower prices to build my business in the beginning. And what happened was the whites said, okay, how can we stop this from happening? Well, what they could have done is they could have tried to compete on price and quality, but they didn't. Instead, they created laws. They created, we entered into the Jim Crow era. We had laws in which, phony laws in which you had to meet certain requirements that blacks couldn't meet in order to do the job. So for instance, you had to read at whatever level to put in a hot water heater, whatever, even though it didn't require that. So we've had laws since, like I said, 10 years after the slaves were freed. And the story that I like to tell the most and point out is Rosa Parks, who was the heroic black woman who refused to sit in the back of the bus. Well, the second part of the story most people don't know, which is that that was a government-owned, government-run bus. And what we saw happen was, well, back then, 60% of the bus ridership were blacks. And so look at today. Let's say Uber did that. Let's say Uber discriminated against the best 60% of their customers. They'd go out of business, as well they should. But the federal government could do it without any accountability. So it's the federal government that has done it. So where we are today is, if you look at, and I'm not sure which statistics you're talking about, I have seen statistics, for instance, that if you look at drugs that whites typically use versus drugs that people of color typically use, drugs that people of color use have longer sentences than drugs that, yeah, we can talk about statistics later. And also, if you look at the percentage of drug users that are jailed. Now, the Black Lives Matter, that was a mistake that somebody put the movement instead of the small letter. I met with, and I was criticized for meeting with the Black Lives Matter leader, but let me point out, there is the Marxist Black Lives Matter national organization, which of course is directly opposite to what we advocate, completely opposite. Now, unfortunately, we see the same problem. And yes, we agree with them on ending qualified immunity, and the Libertarian Party has always been big on police action like that, of getting rid of those type of laws. The Libertarian Party has always been against no-knock raids. We've always been against a drug war, things that have had disparate between whites and blacks. However, what we have right now is, well, let me continue with the police force. Oh, I'm sorry, back to what I was saying before about the Black Lives Matter movement. So, yes, we are completely against the Marxist movement. We see the same problem, drug laws, no-knock laws, and so forth. But their problem is more, or their solution is more government. Our solution is less government. And it breaks my heart that the people who have been oppressed by big government are clamoring for more big government. And so I think meeting and explaining some of these things will help us. And when I met with a Black Lives Matter leader in Tulsa who is not affiliated with the Marxist movement, I explained to him that, Rosa Parks was on a government-run, government-owned bus, and he had no idea. And we sat down and we actually agreed with a lot of things. And he said, you know what, this makes a lot of sense. And he was a black preacher who had been in prison previously, who has turned his life around and has seen that prison reform needs to happen. Again, so many things that we agree on. So I understand the controversy there, but what I would like to do is I would like to educate some of these people who share some of our beliefs and hopefully get them on board the small government train and not the big government train, because if we don't stop the big government train, it's going to take off. So I realize that was a really long answer. I promise the second one will be shorter.
I don't disagree with your opinions on healthcare. However, no matter what you do about healthcare, those on minimum wage, the disabled, the elderly, are never going to be able to afford healthcare. What happens to them under your plans?
Yeah, so you're right. We absolutely cannot go, we can't just, pull the rug out from underneath people and say, okay, free market, go out there and buy your own doctor, because they can't afford to, because prices are so high. So I would do a stepping stone similar to the system in Singapore or similar to the system in the state of Indiana. And let me mention how well the state of Indiana is working. So before they instituted the program, and by the way, it was completely voluntary. You could stay with the old insurance, which really wasn't insurance at all, or go with the new type. And only a few people signed up the first year, but word spread quickly how great this system was. And before the program was put in place, only 10% of the drugs that were purchased were generic, which again you would expect, right? Because as I mentioned, nobody spends other people's money as well as they spend their own. Within just a year or two, 90% of the drugs sold or used by the employees were generic, because they got the benefit, they got to keep the savings. So what they're doing, and what I would suggest as a stopgap, as a stepping stone, would be for veterans, people with Medicare, Medicaid, instead of giving them the benefits, put the dollars into their account and then make the doctors compete for their business. And I realize that the government putting money into people's accounts is not a strictly libertarian solution. We have to start somewhere. And we've got to get the prices down before we can just tell people, okay, go out and find your own doctor. And prices should come down very quickly, since over half of the healthcare dollars go through the federal government. And if we've got people who are out there driving down prices, then we can go to a completely free market. So again, I completely agree. If I'm elected in November, January 1, we can't just say, okay, everybody on your own.
Hello.
Hey.
As President of the United States, what would you do to destroy the two-party system?
I guess start making government smaller. So the way they've got power is they've got so much in there, and I hope I'm answering your question this way, because I would say first of all, I would say that your assumption is the way to destroy the system. I would say getting elected would be the way to destroy the system. But yes, once I'm elected, what I'd like to point out is, right now, if we look at, and education's my favorite example for this, right? People ask, why are we at war with each other? Why are we so polarized? Well, look at it this way. Let's say you want prayer in your child's school, and let's say your neighbor doesn't. What you have to do is you guys have to battle it out. You have to donate to your favorite candidate. You have to put yard signs out. You've got to get other people to vote for your candidate. Then you go to the ballot box and then you vote. And there's going to be one winner and one loser. Either there's going to be prayer in the school or not. Under a libertarian system, each person could have their own choice. And we keep hearing about the corruption in Washington. A lot of people don't realize that Congress was very corrupt back in the 1930s and 1940s. But people didn't care as much because not everything went through the government. And now you can't even have local education be decided by local people. You got to go through the federal government for that, through the Department of Education. So if we had a system in which government was so small that you got to pick your own education, pick your own healthcare, pick your own retirement, and basically make your own decisions, then they wouldn't have the power. And of course, money brings along power. So by putting the decision-making power into the hands of people rather than government, now we've pretty much destroyed their system. Well, thank you so much. Oh, if you have a quick question, I'll try to. I guess the fact that I teach college is coming out. I actually have answered shorter questions today, but these are just kind of longer.
I had a question about with all the trillions of dollars being created out of thin air, like
Oh my
recently
gosh.
since 2008, 2009. I was wondering, what is your plan to rein in and hopefully eliminate the Federal Reserve?
Yes. My plan would be to first audit and then abolish the Federal Reserve. And what I would do is I would go to Ron Paul and ask him for a recommendation of who to put in charge of the Fed while we're doing that. And some people ask me, do you want to go back to the gold standard? Well, I'd like to take it further and say we should have free market money. Of course, we should have cryptocurrency. We should have any currency you like. In fact, if you hear stories of the olden days, you know, people would take chickens to their doctor to pay their health care bill. If you're a company and you want to accept chickens as currency, that should be your right. You've got two people trading, whatever you agree on, fine with me. Government needs to stay out of it. So thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much to everyone that came out and took time out of your own day to support the Libertarian Party, to support Third Party. Support the only party that wants actual freedom and what the founding fathers stood for: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now we're on that way, but if you haven't yet, please try to sign the petitions for ballot access for Joe. And if you haven't, text Joe, J-O, to 22525 to donate. There's free postcards for Joe, well, of Joe's. But thank you so much for taking time out of your day to support the Libertarian Party. Thank you so much.